everyone, and welcome to our next episode of Big Data Talks, in which we have conversations with industry experts about the way in which data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence are changing the way we live. My name is Jan-Willem Middelburg, and I will be your host again today. I'm the author of the Enterprise Big Data Framework, which is hosting this series of Big Data Talks. You can always watch back the recording of this discussion on YouTube, the Big Data Framework website, and the podcasting platforms of Spotify and Apple Podcast. Today, I have the immense pleasure to welcome Christopher Chin, a seasoned professional who has embarked on a mission to revolutionize the way data professionals communicate. With diverse backgrounds spanning data journalism, data science, data visualization, and BI, Christopher brings a unique perspective to the world of data. Having identified a crucial gap in the training landscape, he founded The Hidden Speaker to address the often neglected realm of soft skills in the data industry. With a bachelor's degree from Columbia University in music and engineering, as well as a master's degree from Penn State University in acoustic engineering, Christopher combines his technical expertise with a passion for effective communication. I think you can see why I wanted to talk to Christopher so much today. Welcome, Christopher, to Big Data Talks. It's an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Great. So I think you already know what my first question is going to be. I'm super eager to learn, how did you transition from a career in music to a career in data?
I think what I've been searching for a very long time is this Japanese concept of ikigai, which has these four components. I believe it's finding what you love, what the world needs, what the world will pay you for, and what you're good at. And each of the career trajectories that I took combined bits and pieces of that, but it was only when I entered data analytics and storytelling that I found all four. So for example, when I was doing data journalism after my career in music, I found that it was what I enjoyed doing, but it wasn't necessarily what the world needed. I was working at the US Department of Transportation. And what I would do is I would analyze the transportation data that we had access to find interesting stories to tell the public about, so they would be interested in the data and investigating further. But I realized if I was let go from that position, the department would go on just fine. My role was more of a nice to have than a need to have. I eventually moved into data science, and it was there that I found something I was good at, but maybe not necessarily something I loved doing. And that was interesting for me. I said, what is it about data science that I enjoy, but something is missing? And the something missing was the creative storytelling aspect. I really loved that as part of my data journalism career. And in data science, I found I was creating these algorithms, this really cool stuff, but I wasn't really tapping into that creative spirit I had before. So when I moved into data analytics and storytelling, I hit all four of those things. It was something I loved, what the world needed. It would pay me for it. And then I found I was decently good at it. And that's where I've really enjoyed finding myself since.
I think it's actually quite an interesting concept that you mentioned with those four different perspectives. And I think a lot more people should really look into that around not just what they like and what they want to do, but also indeed what the world needs and if there's a good commercial model behind that. So That's very interesting. One of the things that you mentioned really triggered me, and that's obviously that musical part, because if you look at the skills necessary to transfer from, I would say, the world of music, which is highly creative, towards the world of data, which is, in my opinion, slightly more mathematical, and I would say moving from the alpha to the beta side, it requires a lot of learning. So I can imagine. I'm just wondering, how did you tackle that transformation? Was it completely self-education, or did you start following courses? Did you go and take a degree somewhere? How do you manage something like that?
It was one of the most difficult challenges I've experienced, was trying to transition from this liberal arts education to a very mathematical, scientific engineering mindset and discipline. And I got a first taste of wanting to do data when I was in graduate school for my acoustic engineering degree. I was trying to study for my thesis how to detect whale calls in audio recording. So there are these endangered whales, and I said, if I can detect them for these microphones in the ocean passively recording. I can help these conservation efforts. And that's how I discovered all these cool machine learning, deep learning algorithms. And I said, this data space is amazing. I want to learn more about this. I did an extensive campaign of self-study and self-discipline to learn everything that I do now. And it was really hard. I didn't have people I was learning it with. I didn't have a formal structured program. But just through that act of self-discipline, putting together my own portfolio of projects, I was finally able to get my first job at the Department of Transportation in the US.
Well, I really think that's a very, very inspiring story. Are there any things that from your career in music you still use today? Now it's more data storytelling. We're going to dive into that in a second.
Yeah.
But what are some, because it's such a unique background. Are there any things that you use still in that part that you use on a daily basis?
I would say two things. One is the creative aspect for sure. As soon as I got my first roles in data, I realized this field is not one where you just do the same thing every day, crunching numbers. You have to think out of the box. If a stakeholder, for example, tells you what they want, I want a dashboard, it's my responsibility to find what they actually need. Maybe they don't need a dashboard. Maybe they need a simple email alert to let them know when a metric drops below a certain threshold. So the creative aspect is essential, and that's what I love to bring in from music. And the second element is something that I bring into my presentation and data storytelling trainings now. And that's the idea that a presentation is not just about giving information. It's about giving experience. And the reason I think of it that way is in music, the reason why people go to concerts is not to just listen to music, because they can listen to the music free on YouTube. It's the same information. Just like in a presentation, people can read the slides themselves. My belief is the purpose of a presentation is to inspire people to do something with the information you've given, to give them a good experience, a simple guided experience of it, just like that's what a concert does for the same musical piece.
Well, that's actually quite a strong analogy, because I never thought about it this way, is that people can essentially get a lot of these experiences for free, yet they choose to pay and go to, in your case, conferences or training courses. So let's talk a little bit more around data storytelling, your current, I would say, specialty, the training courses that you do around that, and especially the soft skill part that brings towards the table. For everyone who's listening, who's completely new to the concept of data storytelling, can you just explain a little bit of what it is, why it's relevant, and especially what's the result that businesses can expect with that?
Absolutely. An analogy I like to use is if you imagine a movie, for example. Let's say you've analyzed some data, you found some interesting things to talk to people about within it. You can create charts based on that data. That could be the frames of the movie. So as we're watching a movie, there are all these frames going, and that creates the sequence of motion and action. Each one could be considered a data visualization. And when you put them in a specific sequence that informs people what's going on, why it matters, and what they should do about it, a very precise storytelling sequence, that's when it just goes from a collection of data visualizations to a data story that then people can use to take action and improve the business.
And how do people get to learn about this? Because when I went to school, this was definitely none of the classes that was on the books. And I see a lot of, to be quite blunt, very lousy visualizations being used every single day. So where do people start? Because suppose I'm listening, I say, this is something I want to learn about. What would be a good place?
I was privileged to work in an organization that valued data storytelling. Many organizations, as you pointed out, it's not part of their daily vocabulary yet. In my organization, we had someone who advocated we shouldn't just create these dashboards. We should focus on giving people a good experience as they're interacting with it, to tell a story and hopefully move people to action, because that's the point of everything that we do. So I would recommend, if people want to start learning about data storytelling, to read some of the really seminal books on the topic. So there's Brent Dyke's Effective Data Storytelling, I believe is what it's called. Yeah. There's Cole Nussbaumer Knaflich's Storytelling with Data. There's tons of books out there. covering this subject. And I highly recommend that if you want to elevate your career potential from not just fulfilling orders from stakeholders, but going a step further, being proactive and telling stories, communicating well, that's where the data storytelling piece needs to come into play.
Very interesting. I love it that you mentioned Brent because he was on the this show a few months ago. So literally in the same seat where you're now. So yeah, I also thought it was amazing that this whole industry around data storytelling that wasn't there a few years ago basically got launched in a very, very quick way. Now, one of your key specialties is around the soft skill element, and how do you motivate people, and how do you tell that specific story in a good story itself? What are the soft skills that you think people need? And most people who create a lot of visualizations or work with data, as you mentioned, have a very technical background, which are generally not known as the people who care too much around the visual aspects. So how do you prepare them for that?
There are many soft skills I think are important in data. One is the creativity that we talked about before, the thinking out of the box, pushing back on stakeholders, not just doing what they want, but finding what they need. But to add on to that, I believe empathy is a really important soft skill to develop. Because so often as technically minded professionals, we're so caught up in our own head, focusing on details, we forget that the people we're presenting it to don't have the same perspective as us. We forget that we include a lot of technical jargon when we speak to them. We include visuals that might make sense to us with all their complexity, but to them, it's just a confusing mess. And one of the
do you have an example of that? Do you have an example around?
So there was one time I was working on a dashboard, for example. And one of the stakeholders, they asked me to create a table of jobs ranked from they took the longest time to they didn't take the longest time. And the point of the table was the ones at the top that took the longest time would probably have errors and they should look into them. Stopping right there, giving them what they wanted would have not been enough. I put myself in their shoes and I said, what do they really need here? And I pushed further. I said, so why do you need this particular table, this particular metric? Why is it that you're measuring this? And they said, well, we want to see what jobs had the greatest amount of errors. And because I knew the data and had worked with it, I knew that that would not have given them the answer they wanted. Yeah. So it was me being proactive. I said, if I give you this, you might be misled because certain jobs might take longer simply because they processed more data, not because they had errors. So what I need to do is give you a different metric. Let me propose this metric where I take the time spent divided by the volume of data processed. And that new metric you can use to see which jobs actually took longer, perhaps because they had those errors. And because I did that, they were able to use the dashboard and find what they were looking for, which they would not have been able to do otherwise.
Absolutely. So that's a great example of basically asking the question beyond what is actually being asked. Mm-hmm. Do you see that a lot in the sense that people ask for a specific result and they think they know what they're looking for, whereas actually the question is different? And the reason I'm asking this is that I do a lot of work in the whole machine learning, data mining space. Mm-hmm. And one of the key tenets there is that typically when you start the project, especially if the data set is very, very large, you absolutely have no idea what the outcome is going to be, let alone what the question needs to be. So is that something you recognize?
What I do see is that stakeholders often do have an idea of what they want. They know, of course, the business domain, the business questions they're trying to answer, the pain points. But in terms of the technical solution they propose to us, they have an idea of it, and it's our responsibility to help them refine it. As another example, I don't believe that data storytelling is a silver bullet solution for everything. Stakeholder might ask me for a data story, but I would push back and say, why do you think you need a data story? And then they would say, well, because we want to persuade people of this particular thing. And then I would dive deeper. Perhaps what they actually need is just a simple automated email alert saying, this is when the metric dropped here. Or maybe they just need a dashboard to help explore and see what things look like every day. As a particular example of that, I was working at the Department of Transportation, and I was creating a specific dashboard to monitor airline traffic. And initially, they wanted a data story. I said, and I asked those questions, I pushed back, I said, explain to me why you want a data story. What is the purpose of this? What are the business questions this is trying to answer? And when I pushed far enough, I found they just wanted a tool to help people in the public monitor how things looked. So essentially, a data story wasn't needed. It was just a dashboard, an exploratory tool that was. I believe that it is definitely then our responsibility to make sure stakeholders are put on the right path and that we guide them in the right direction.
Interesting. And building upon that, if suppose that in that Department of Transportation, the question would have been different, and suppose not that they wanted the dashboard, but that it needed to be converted into, let's say, a book or a flyer or an interactive movie. Does the underlying data set then change, and does the messaging change? Or do you say data is data, this is ultimately what's in it, and the format in which we present it is just different? I hope I understand, or I'm pronouncing your question correctly.
I believe so. And I'll give another example from my time there that might be relevant. I was working on a project where a data story was required. And this was an international noise map. So this is a map showing what are the levels of noise throughout the United States. I created an interactive map application for that purpose, and also an accompanying flyer that said, these are the areas with the most noise. This is what we could potentially do to mitigate that problem. And in that particular situation, what I found was I needed to bring in additional data to tell my story. Data stories often require us to not just use the data we have at hand, but figure out the why question. Why is this going on? Why is there so much noise in this particular city? And then I have to pull in additional data to figure out that answer. Or what should we do? What policies are there at play? What can I influence? So data storytelling is really about thinking out of the box, being creative in that sense, and pulling in the data necessary to fill those gaps in your story.
Yeah, that was exactly the example I was aiming
perfect.
at, and especially the two different modalities, if you want to call it, in ways in which you can communicate the same data in especially different ways. Now, I think it's fair to say that you've been involved with, I would say, the professionalization of this area, especially in the last few years. How have you seen data storytelling, knowledge about data, the creation of messages using data storytelling techniques? How have you seen that evolve, especially in the United States in the last few years?
I've been very excited to see enthusiasm for it grow. I started posting on LinkedIn a year and a half ago, and some creators told me, it's great you're starting to post now on this topic, because a few years ago, this would have been a dead topic pretty much. Not everybody was talking about it to this extent. So I see increasingly a lot of people saying, yeah, soft skills, communication, presentation, storytelling, they're really key. And I think, especially since ChatGPT was released in, I believe, 2022, November, there has been a rise of people understanding how important not just the technical aspect is, but also the soft skill aspect. Because we see ChatGPT can do all the things we can do much faster. Is it right? Is it the best solution? Maybe not, but it's on the way. And at the end of the day, we need to work on the skills like communication that it can't replace yet, human-to-human communication.
Yeah. So I fully agree, by the way, with you that it's the enthusiasm, the interest in it has grown very, very rapidly. But as you probably know, with grown interest, there's also a lot of people who say, well, maybe there's also a darker side to this, and that is the techniques that are being used in data storytelling can also be used to try to sell you something, or to change your beliefs, or to get you to vote for somebody. Do you feel that there is a potential that data storytelling and the techniques behind that might be misused? And if so, what would be ways in which we can safeguard ourselves against that?
I have a few thoughts on it that I've been thinking about for a while. One is that data storytelling is often made out to be a very subjective art, let's say, because I, as the presenter, am giving a specific perspective that I'm trying to convince you of. What I want to argue is that every other part of the process before the storytelling piece is also in part subjective. For example, when we start to analyze data, when we decide to take on a project, why did we decide to do that? It's our subjective decision in part to do it. We value this project over this one. There's not really an objective metric that says this one is scored 100, this is scored 200, so we should choose the one scored 100. And proceeding on, when we create dashboards, as another example, when we choose to put a chart in the top left and then the bottom right in the middle, how are we making that decision? It's in part subjective. And that's why, to an extent, people believe dashboarding is an art and also a science. There's not a specific framework and formula to follow every single time. There's some flexibility involved. So when we get to storytelling, I don't believe it's any more subjective than those previous pieces. It's just a little more visible than that.
Yeah.
The other parts are a little more hidden in the process we use to get there. The other thought I have around storytelling is that it, like anything, can be used for those more shady ends that you described. And it's our responsibility as data professionals to be ethical and responsible about it. I was talking to one person, for example, who said they see salespeople trying to sell these bad products all the time. So they said, I don't want to learn how to persuade and communicate and all that because I feel like it's unethical. And I said, what if, consider this thought experiment, what if you learned those skills, you were really good at communicating and persuading, and you had a good product? Then you're doing the world a service by being able to convince people to use that product, right? Yeah. And they said, I didn't think about it that way, but you're right. If I'm selling something that I know, perhaps there's research, I have testimonials that's proven that it has helped people, then communication, presentation, storytelling, motivation, persuasion, they can all just help us better achieve that goal. It's a superpower in our skill set, and it's something that we should learn. So as with any skill, it can be used for those darker ends, but we can use it for good too.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a very, very excellent perspective. The reason I ask you this question is I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and I saw this presenter that had I would say, a base case of data set, and he basically presented two visualizations, which were based on the exact same underlying data set. He basically asked the audience, which one do you prefer? And typically the half of the audience preferred visualization A, the other half preferred B, and basically then explained, this is exactly that we are the confirmation bias. We are reinvigorating what is it that your current belief set, and based upon that, you are picking them. So the essence of the message was the data is not biased. You are, because you tend to reflect towards a specific set. Now, in this day and age in which we have this tremendous drive towards and discussion around the validity of information, misinformation, deliberate misinformation that we sometimes see, are there any ways in which we could use data storytelling techniques? And you just, I think, mentioned use it for good or use it as a superpower in order to let people know that whatever visualization they're looking at, there's always this, as you mentioned, a subjective belief behind it. Or should there be a disclaimer with every visualization that you see?
Yeah. I think a great way to prevent people from misinterpreting or going in the wrong direction is increasing data literacy, helping people understand how to read charts in a way, be skeptical, a healthy degree of skepticism. What I also believe is that we as data storytellers can be equally as confident saying our perspective as we are saying the disclaimers and caveats and nuances, that we have to do both. Because as a data storyteller, I'm not going to show you everything in the data set. When I visualize it, to the example you just gave, I'm just going to point out very specific things that I've noticed that I want you to notice. And because I've done that, I've excluded a lot of other stuff. So it's my responsibility to tell you, hey, I'm highlighting this, but also be aware that of all the implications of that. or you have to be careful about the interpretation. So I believe that for us to be ethical data storytellers, we have to do both those things: what we believe, and also all the pros and cons and things that people should be aware of.
Absolutely. So one of the interesting things, and this is one of the reasons that I wanted to invite you and talk to you today, is that you also do a lot of work in terms of presentations and going to conferences and speaking about the experiences, just like you just did to me. I, by the way, noticed that you also have a lot of stories in your data storytelling, so I can really see it coming out. What besides the educational part and collecting, what do you like so much around presenting? Because I think that's a separate skill set as well.
I'll tell you a story there. That's I, as a kid, was very shy and very quiet and very introverted, and I hated speaking. So if I was myself back then, I could never have imagined doing what I do now, which is speaking everywhere, publicly, globally, virtually, in person. But strangely, I get this excitement and thrill from doing public speaking because I know that I can change the way people think and I can inspire them. And something that I love about presenting, especially in person, I was just at a conference a few days ago, is you can feel the energy of everyone in the room with you. And when you get them to that aha moment, oh, I understand that. Now I can do that in my own work. Now I see things a different way. You feel really good about that because you've helped them. And presentation, I think, is one of the best vehicles for inspiring. As we talked about before, it's not just about the information, which people can read on their own. But me as the human being, with my voice and my body language and my storytelling, I can inspire them to see things in a new light.
Yeah. And that's the interesting analogy that you're bringing up. And this is also the reason that I asked the question, or at least the question behind the question is, I believe that a lot of the techniques that you have in data storytelling can also be used in storytelling on stage or in person. Or do you have any specific elements from more of the theory behind data storytelling that you are using when you are presenting?
Yeah. I'll give you an example story to showcase that.
Yeah.
So let's say we'll rewind back to when I was working at one of these companies I was in the senior data visualization engineer role.
Yeah.
I was in a meeting and I distinctly remember I was very quiet in that meeting because I was still very hesitant about speaking. And one of my coworkers, same level as me, was very extroverted, talking all the time. And there was a moment that happened after that meeting. Someone came up to me and said, Chris, you're as quiet as a mouse, but that other person, they're as loud as a firecracker. We don't know. We're not sure if you really are invested in this project and really care about it. And that was the moment that I said, this speaking thing is really holding me back. I can't advance in my career and show people everything I can do unless I learn how to speak well. So after that moment, I decided I need to really work on this every single day. Record a video of myself. I'll work on this little aspect of my speaking, tweak it, improve until I'm confident in it one day, until I'm formidable at it one day. And now I'm at a point where I'm confident enough to teach it to others. So in that story that I told you, there were key things I did to structure it. I started it with the beginning, with before, how things were before. And in a data story, we have to provide context about how things were in the past, maybe historical benchmarks around important key performance indicators. And then I moved to the moment everything changed. That moment when after the meeting, someone told me, hey, you're as quiet as a mouse. We don't know if you really care about this. That was my insight moment. And in data storytelling, we move up to the insight we found in the data. That should change the way things are done in the company. Then I moved to after that change, I decided to do X, Y, Z. So in data storytelling, once we reach the insight, we have to tell people, what do you do with that information so we can improve the business for the better.
Yeah. So that last step is really around triggering action for people to also say, now I'm going to do something with the information I have. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Good. That's a very interesting. I do a lot of speaking as well, so I might want to borrow one or two of those concepts you just mentioned. Good.
Absolutely.
One of the things I noticed as well is that you call yourself online and on your website, which I kind of looked through when we prepared for this interview, is you call yourself the hidden speaker.
Yeah.
What's the messaging behind that, and what's the idea behind it?
The message is that every person has a hidden speaker inside of them. I work a lot with technical, introverted professionals who, like me, suffered in their career potential because they didn't master these communication skills. They had all the technical skills. But one person I knew, for example, wasn't promoted for 15 years because they wanted to be a manager, but their boss said, you need to learn communication to be a leader. I knew another person who was held back in their career because every presentation they gave wasn't understood by their manager. It was too technical. Eventually, they were moved to another team. They were not sure of his use on the team. And I see countless other cases of managers and executives who they spend their whole career in professional development working on everything but communication for some reason. And I believe it's my mission to help bring out the hidden speaker in each of them, to enhance their communication in their own unique and individual way, to help unlock their full career potential.
It's a very inspiring story, and I also, now that I know the messaging behind it, it's a great way in which you help them achieve that. If you build a little bit around that, do you think that communication is one of the most underestimated skills? And to build upon that a little bit more, do you feel that great leaders, the people that we look up to, are first and foremost great communicators before anything else?
I believe that communication is one of the most overlooked and underestimated skills.
Yeah.
And I think the reason for that is we often associate communication with this innate intelligence. You have to be born with it or not. You got it or you don't got it. And I see people come up to me and say, I just wasn't born to be loud and expressive. I don't know what I'm doing. And I say, how did you learn SQL or Tableau or Power BI or any of these other cloud platforms that you use? What you did was you learned the theory, you practiced it, you applied it, you reflected back on it, and then you apply it to unfamiliar domains to build your mastery. Yeah. Same is true of communication. It's learnable. You don't have to be born with it. Just like technical skills, some people are better at it initially than others, but everybody can get up to a certain level of mastery if they apply themselves enough and are disciplined enough. Yeah. And I say the same for communication. You can learn it. Anyone can learn it. They just have to put in the reps and the effort to do so. And to your other question about leadership, I've done a lot of research investigating what is the relationship between leadership and communication. And what I've concluded is that leadership is communication. There are research studies that show that employees are more engaged in the workplace, do better work. They associate their identity more with their organization if they have leaders who communicate well, if they have leaders who give them tasks in a clear and concise manner, leaders who demonstrate they actually care about them. That is the key to retention in organizations and also great leadership.
Yeah, well, I agree with you in the sense, especially that the providing the messages coherently and in a concise manner, as you just mentioned, but also being able to have that, and maybe it comes back to the empathy that you just mentioned, towards the people around them. That's ultimately a communication, no matter how good your technical skills are. Now, one of the things that really triggered me is you say, it's a skill that everyone can learn. And within the domain of technology and specifically in IT, we generally see the two classes of people, the introverts, the extroverts. The story you just gave around the colleague who was the loudest voice in the room is very much reflecting of that more extrovert approach. If you have two different types of people in your classes, so more introverts versus extroverts, do you have a different approach to how do you use data storytelling?
I do have a different approach. And I believe that the best way to evaluate if communication is successful is if it's clear. And I reached this conclusion trying to go through all these other metrics, very data-driven as a data professional. I said, what is the metric of success for communication? And first I said, well, is it the amount of information provided? If there's more information, is it more successful? And my answer, no, Probably not, because the more information you give, the more people will forget, the less they'll understand. And then the second metric I said was, well, what if is communication successful if it's perfect? So let's say no filler words, no ums, no stutters or rambles. And I said, well, I don't think so, because if we see a person present at a conference, let's say they mess up something, they forget something. If they keep moving forward, we're not going to remember that moment an hour from now. They'll still give a successful, great presentation. So it's not perfection either. And I concluded at the end that it's clarity. Because if you're clear about what you're saying, then that's all that's in your control. If the people in the audience receive it and take action on it, that's in their control. So when I work with professionals who are introverted or extroverted, I focus on helping them enhance their own authentic clarity. For introverts, for example, who may talk at a softer tone of voice, that there's nothing wrong with that inherently. But I say it's important that you be clear in your voice when you're speaking to executives. So if you're speaking too softly that they can't hear, then that's where the issue is.
Yeah.
And so what I help them do is develop the range in their ability to speak. So not just constant soft tone, but you need to elevate it and increase and augment it for moments of importance. That is an example for introverts. For extroverts, who are already very good at being expressive, sometimes it's good to pull back.
Yeah.
So for data visualizations, for example, if everything is loud and colorful, I don't know what's important. If everything I say is constantly loud and I'm talking at this volume all the time, then you don't know what is the important thing to pay attention to. So for extroverts, sometimes it's important to encourage the pausing.
Yeah.
So really giving space between your ideas and letting them breathe.
And then to tone it down accordingly, because that's one of the, I frequently see that as one of the misconceptions when we talk about communication. A lot of people are more on the IT, more typically introverts, I'd say, oh, I'm going to leave that to the people who are more natural speakers. But sometimes if you listen to them, it's just too much information and it's too loud, too in your face, which also prohibits the effective crossing of the message. And I like the word clarity that you just mentioned, getting a clear message across. So I think that the truth is somewhere in the middle, and that's, I think, exactly in line with what you just said. Good. Time is flying very quickly in this interview. In the last part, I always like to ask some questions around, I know where we are today, but what's the future gonna bring to us? You already mentioned, and this is the topic everyone is talking about these days around artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, all the large language models. I'm going to challenge you to look beyond the hype right now. Where do you see the world of data storytelling, technology in general, move after this AI wave? What are the new and exciting things that we're going to be seeing in the next few years?
I'm really excited to see how we use AI with data storytelling. I gave in my talk a few days ago at the conference a preview of what could be in the future. I did a live demo of ChatGPT creating a data story in real time. And I wanted to show it's possible for us to use AI to make our work much faster than we normally could manually. And also to use AI not just as a machine to follow our orders, but treat it like a human being. So if I have ChatGPT pretend to be my audience, then I can say, take the data story you just gave me, evaluate it from their perspective, and tell me what they would think. So that kind of feedback loop is extremely powerful for helping us not only create the data stories faster, but also, before we even present it, see what people think about it or potentially could think about it. What I also see on the horizon for AI and data storytelling is allowing us to get more real-time data stories created. So if I'm presenting to an executive, normally I'd prepare a whole slide deck in advance and then present one slide at a time. But maybe in that meeting, this executive wants to know, how is this metric right now? What is the story around that right now? And maybe AI can help us create those data stories instantly on the fly in that room with that person that we can then present. That's one of the most exciting things I think is on the horizon.
I fully agree. One of the other things I've seen, and this is just to build a little bit on what you said, is now not just the large language models, the metric itself, but the ability to create live videos of which
Hmm.
people communicate with each other, tell each other literally a story. Um, what's your thoughts on AI in the generation of video?
Hmm.
And how is that going to change everything?
Yeah, I have my own concerns about AI and its creation of art, for example, myself
Yeah,
being a musician and an artist beforehand.
I, yeah,
And just knowing that to train it to be able to generate the videos it can and to generate the art that it does, it needed to take in the data from all these artists who didn't necessarily give their consent to do that. That I do have some ethical concerns around that.
yeah,
But seeing the product itself for what it is, it's amazing what it can do. I think it
yeah.
will totally change the game for media created in the future, data storytelling created in the future, and I'm excited to see where it is with hesitance.
It's going back then, maybe, and maybe that's good towards getting towards the end, going back towards music. Because you mentioned as an artist, and it's interesting that you still see that as kind of like your starting point.
Yeah.
Um, there is obviously a lot of debate around, to what extent can I use particular clips, particular tunes. There's only so many tunes that exist, so it's ultimately all a remix of specific tones and information. But to what extent can I reuse that? And when does it become plagiarism, or when is a particular beat stolen? Could you say that through AI we could identify signatures from artists and say, if it's this pattern, and I'm not as technical in the whole music domain,
Hmm.
but this is a question I've always been wondering around. Could we make a profile of a artist or musician based on the way that they make their music?
I think absolutely we can. Actually, an area I wanted to go into that would have combined music with data
Yeah,
was a very specific domain of, I think it was music identification using artificial intelligence and
makes
machine
sense.
learning. And I think there are companies that do something similar now. I forget the exact name. I want to say Shazam or something like that, that can analyze a piece of music and detect what piece it is, what song it is, exactly the
This,
name.
yeah, correct.
And
Yeah.
I could imagine that if you extend that out, you could create a profile for an artist's signature sound. So
Hmm.
if I asked some artificial intelligence to generate a piece in the style of Beethoven or Mozart or Taylor Swift, it could do that because it understands how they usually do it. So I think absolutely it will be possible in the future.
That's a very interesting part. Now, my absolute last question, and this is the question I've been asking all my guests who have been on this podcast, is we have our most people who listen to this podcast are between 15 and 25, so a pretty young audience. Um, and the question is always, if they are listening right now and they want to learn how do I get into data storytelling, what is a last piece of advice you would give to, I would say, the next generation
Yeah.
around the way that this is really changing the world?
I would recommend for young professionals who want to advance their career, especially anticipating everything going on with AI, it's important to work on these soft skills like data storytelling, communication, and presentation. And I see increasingly when I talk to hiring managers, they tell me, we don't just want people who check off all the boxes for technical skills. We would much more rather hire someone with great soft skills and maybe less technical skills, but has the desire to learn and demonstrates the ability to do so. I think that even more in the future will be important to show you can speak, you can present, you can interact with stakeholders, you can think out of the box, all of these things. And to
Mhm.
work on those skills, I recommend every day, as I did, to try and learn them. Record a short video of yourself. It only has to be for you. And it's
Yeah.
painful to watch back, but it's the best exercise to learn. We hate the sound of our own voice, how we look, but over time, by refining little elements each time. For one video, you could say, the next video, I'll try and cut out one of my ums. In the next video, you can say, I'll try and change the variety of my voice a little bit more. Little incremental improvements. And after a month or even a year, you will see tremendous progress on each of those metrics you're tracking. I recommend that to every young professional because at that age, you have so much drive to succeed and
Yeah.
ambition, and might as well leverage it to really propel you into a great future.
I would say that that's probably one of the best parting advices that I've heard so far on the show. Thanks,
Awesome.
Christopher. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I think you're a very knowledgeable, intelligent, well-spoken presenter. So I would recommend everyone, highly would recommend everyone to get in touch, follow one of your courses, book a presentation. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much
Thank you
for
so
joining.
much. Thank you for having me on.